This is Wildcat Country.
Larson tipped it. Love has it. Lewis slams it, and Arizona wins it.
The inside scoop on the Arizona Wildcats.
It's Gunnar Maldonado. He's got blockers. Touchdown, Arizona.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to bear down.
Welcome to another edition of Wildcat Country presented by Harrah's Auction Casino. Eric Cohen and Shane Dale, and this is our second episode this week. But when you win in an incredible overtime after a half-court shot against the number 3 team in the country, you get 2 episodes in a week. That's how we roll around here, Shane.
Yeah, and that happens once every, 30 years or so for Arizona?
Yeah, I mean, the rare 2-episode week. Hey, listen, it's a great week. We can't argue with it.
No, we'll take it. I feel like, and we got some great comments on our kind of impromptu episode against after they beat Iowa State, and some people made some good comments, including this is one of Tommy Lloyd's better coaching jobs, and I tend to agree. While it's the results haven't been there compared to previous seasons, this team is definitely still lagging behind where the previous Tommy Lloyd teams have been at this point. You think about the maturation of some of the players, and we talked about Caleb Love, but Toby Awaka had a monster game against Iowa State. It was kind of lost in the shuffle, and Arizona's great at developing those big guys. Same with Henry Vasar. He's getting there. He's made more progress than we ever thought he would. And K. Lewis is becoming, as our buddy Jeff Dean texted me the other day, the kind of the Swiss Army knife for Arizona. Jaden Bradley's looking more comfortable in his position. Carter Bryant as well is definitely maturing game to game. So a lot to discuss. Our prop 2 episode kind of focused on that shot and just the game itself, but now we get to look forward a little bit and. I'll do my best not to be too much of a wet blanket, but sometimes I just can't help myself, Eric.
Well, fortunately, we have Evan Miyakawa is going to join us in the second segment. Shane and I had a chance to sit down with him on Tuesday night. He is one of the great data scientists and college football analytical guys out there, given a shout out by, I think it was Bruce Pearl the other day from, Auburn, who's crushing it this year. So Evan's a sharp guy. Shane and I had a chance to have him on the show for the first time on Tuesday night, but let's get right into it. It is time for buy or sell, and I mean, this isn't really a buy or sell though, but Shane, so what happens from here? Do you expect this team to come out and play more energized after that big win, or do you expect them to fall flat without making a prediction yet on Saturday against ASU?
Well, I'll rephrase it a little bit in the buy or sell format. Do I think that this will help propel the team forward? Yeah, I'll buy that. Not just because of the win and because of what it does for them in net rankings and in seed lines and all that. But I like what Tommy Lloyd said after the game. He said, we could look at this win as an event, kind of a standalone crazy thing that happened, or we can use it as part of our process to get better. Basically a launching point for the rest of the season. And I obviously he prefers the latter, and I think that's a great way to look at it. And I think as big a win as it was for the team, it was even more important for Caleb Love and his confidence. We've talked about how poor a shooter he's been against Arizona's best opponents this season. And for 39 minutes and 58 seconds, that trend continued against Iowa State. And then he didn't just hit the 60-footer to send it to overtime. He came up big in overtime and outscored Iowa, I think 2-1 on his own. And Arizona has a lot of talent from 1 to 8 on their roster, but for better or worse, this is still Caleb Love's team, I believe. And Arizona's just not going to make a deep tournament run unless he plays well. And they can beat certain teams if he doesn't play well, but not the best of the best. And if the final 5:02 of the game against Iowa State doesn't turn things around for him, I'm not sure what will. So I think that this is still Caleb Love's team. Arizona has different ways to beat you, but when you play great teams like Iowa State, you're going to see it against Houston and Kansas and whoever they play in the tournament. Caleb Love, your best players got to step up, and Caleb Love is still there. Whether you could argue whether he's their best player, he's the guy who wants the ball late in games. He's the guy who is willing to take over, doesn't wilt in those situations. And I think Arizona is going to ultimately go as far as Caleb Love takes them. So from that perspective, just getting this confidence back, not just the half court heave, but this big play in overtime, I think could end up being a huge deal for Arizona, maybe even bigger than the win itself.
All right. I mean, the letdown effect is possible, but I think this team's going to come out and play hard in Tempe, and it's going to be a back and forth game. But I don't expect them to fall flat. I think they know now they're playing for bigger things. I think they've caught their stride. This was a game that against Iowa State. I mean, let's be honest, they should have lost. They were outscored in the second chain. They were outscored by 4 in the second half. They were up by 4 at half. Excuse me, they were being outscored by 7 until the 3-point shot in the second half. I mean, Iowa State outplayed them down the stretch and deserved to win the game.
And they were missing one of their best players as well. So there's that.
Yeah, and I think Iowa State's a really good team, and we'll hear what Evan has to say about it later in the show based on his rankings. However, Arizona got this win. They were awesome in overtime, scored the last 11 points, and you would hope that would propel you forward. Now, if they come out flat on Saturday, I'm going to be fairly concerned. That would be a problem for me, but I don't expect that to happen. So for me, I'm buying the fact that they will play better going forward after this. Now, number 2, Shane, where does this Love shot and the game itself rank among all-time regular season Arizona basketball memories? And if you want to incorporate football, by all means.
Oh, football too. Yeah. Well, it's too many. I'll try to keep it succinct and just stick to basketball because I could go on for a while. Definitely in terms of games I didn't attend because I'm always biased, toward those. It's up there for sure. I was there for Derek Williams' block shot against Washington, which was also a wide out. Yep. Their comeback against Florida the same day the football team made its comeback in the New Mexico Bowl. Was it 15-12 or something like that? And I was there in 2004 with the Daily Wildcat when Luke called scoreboard on the ASU student section. And I remember that. So I have a lot of great in-person memories, and I'm sort of biased towards those. But as far as moments I've seen on TV, if we're just talking regular season, I don't remember that ever happening to McHale Center for Arizona. I don't remember something like, obviously Miles Simon's full court shot against Cincinnati. That one wasn't at McHale. But I don't remember one of those going Arizona's way at McHale Center ever. So any number of wins over UCLA you could put up there. And we're sticking to the regular season. It's hard for me to go to single out a lot of big individual moments. They had a lot of great games over the years, but as far as like a single moment, we got recency bias, but it's top 3, top 5, maybe number 1, depending on, and of course it also depends on kind of how the rest of the season goes. If Arizona ends up winning the championship or going to the Final Four, I know we're not talking about that just yet, but if that does happen, then it's going to be remembered even more fondly.
So what I can think of is obviously the Miles Simon shot against Cincinnati at Veterans Memorial Coliseum in Phoenix. I think that was one. The Derek Williams block, I think, in my opinion, even though you and I were at the game, it was a great game, but I think the moment itself pales in comparison to what we saw on Monday. I cannot think of a basketball moment like that. The only thing that would stand out in my mind, recency bias included, was the Hail Mary in 2014.
Sure.
I think that, from a football standpoint, but I think this is, as I called the shot when we did our podcast, I said it was an iconic play in Arizona basketball history, non-postseason history. And I think this is one of the great moments in Arizona basketball regular season history that we will see in the pregame videos for years to come.
No doubt about it. And for it to happen in such a premium spot on TV in a night where no other top 25 games are going on, leading into Scott Van Pelt's show on ESPN, was great exposure. And then your point about the football program, not only was that an amazing play in itself, but one of the reasons we remember it so fondly was because that was part of a great season, and that play is one of the catalysts for it. I mean, Arizona doesn't go to the Pac-12 championship game or win the Pac-12 South or go to the Fiesta Bowl without it. And I believe the following week after they won that game against the Hail Mary, was it the following week where they went to number 2 Oregon and won?
I think so.
I
think so.
I think that followed it. So that they didn't they didn't buy into their own hype and all that. They I think recognized the opportunity, kind of the second chance they got there. and took it full advantage of it. And hopefully the basketball team does the same thing.
All right, let's move on to number three. I don't know how much you want to talk about this, Shane, but the fact that these games are so late, and I think you had tweeted about it, and there was some kind of an I don't want to say an uproar because there wasn't that, but people, these late games. Do you think in terms of attendance? Now the game was sold out and the crowd was phenomenal at McHale Center, but
Yep.
going forward, when you have these late games that are 8:30 on a Monday or Tuesday, in my opinion, and I know this is a long-winded way of phrasing this, in my opinion, going out on Thursday night when you're in college was like a thing to do. I didn't go out on Monday and Tuesday. I don't know about the rest of you guys listening out there. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. But there's a stigma about going out on Thursdays, which is what, the Pac-12 era versus now Mondays and Tuesdays in the Big 12 era. So in a way, I can't really blame anyone, whether any fans, for not wanting to go to an 8:30 game on a Monday or Tuesday night. I don't even think this is an issue. I think it's just a matter of TV times, and the fans should be absolved of any blame that's out there. Would you buy or sell that notion?
Oh, well, I'll buy that. Yeah, and just to back up, I posed a question on X last week because Arizona was still trying to sell tickets to the Iowa State game, just with it just a few days away, and fans can correct me if I'm wrong, but when I went to school, I don't remember Arizona men's basketball tickets typically still being available that close to a big game. And don't get me wrong, like you said, I still think McHale Center is one of the toughest places to play in the country. I'm not complaining about a sellout because a lot of arenas don't get half full for these games. And obviously, the atmosphere at McHale, like you said, for the Iowa State game was phenomenal. But it just got me thinking. I posed the question, between these late ticket sales for basketball and the football team struggling to sell out Arizona Stadium, even when the team's doing well, is the relationship between the city of Tucson and the university as strong as it used to be? So I posed the question because I'm genuinely curious. I haven't lived in Tucson since I graduated in '04. I've been down there a number of times, but I haven't lived there in over 20 years. So I don't know. And wanted to see what fans thought. And we got a lot of good answers. Some fans were saying high ticket prices are a problem. It's obviously now it's a lot cheaper and easier to watch games in 4K with the comfort of your own home. And some did note, like you said, the ridiculously late start times, which I get. And you've talked about this, Eric. It's getting more difficult for you to drive down from the Valley to attend 8:30 kickoffs, as diehard a fan as you are. It's difficult. And for basketball, I'm sure it's the same way. So, no, I certainly don't look down at fans for the late sellout. And that wasn't my point at all. I mean, I haven't been down to a game there for a while, so I have no room to talk about that. But I just think it's a question worth asking as far as is there that relationship between the city and university? Is it what it was 20, 30, 40 years ago? And if not, why is that happening and what needs to change? But again, it's you watch the game on Monday night, even as an impartial observer, and you've never been to McHale, you watch the crowd, you're thinking, wow, that must be a great atmosphere. That hasn't changed over the years. But as far as maybe the ticket sales themselves have gone down, and I'm thinking it's probably more because of the reasons we just mentioned. But I also am just curious if the relationship is as strong as it used to be between city and university.
I think so. I mean, I think these game times are ridiculous. I really, in my opinion, I mean, I think when the team is winning, I mean, if this was a losing team, like any losing team though, Shane, people become disassociated with it. When your team is not in contention. But this Arizona team has perked up of late, and so I don't think it's necessarily anything, general between the city of Tucson or the Arizona fans and the program. I think the fact is, if the team is good and the game is at a reasonable time, people are going to go. And I mean, the fact is, I'm going to give up my football season tickets because the game times are so late. If every game was Saturday between 12:30 and 5 o'clock, I'm going to every game, and there's no question about that. But the fact that there's 8:15 and 8:30 games, and the tickets, let's be honest, I can't sell them. I mean, nobody's gonna pay anything because there are gonna be plenty of tickets available because the team's not that great.
Yeah, but I just think back to, I think it's more of a football thing, really, but because I think back to last season, I mean, fans were still excited going into last season. I know that Jed Fish left, but I think fans were excited about Brett Brennan when he got so many players to return to the team, and there's still that buzz about the football program. And I know that fell apart, but even early in the season, ticket sales just weren't what you would hope or think they might be. And I remember even in the last year Jed Fish was here, he was talking about like a few thousand tickets left for a big game coming up. I forget which one it was, but he said he kind of made a comment of like I'm not sure how that's possible, And now he's in Washington, and I'm still unhappy that he left, obviously, but he doesn't have to worry about that in Washington. So I think the football thing is a bigger issue. I think it's a combination of the things we talked about, which is late kickoff times, ticket prices. I know they went up this past year, and then just the team is good, but only intermittently. The relationship isn't that strong as it is with the basketball team. So all those things I think factor in. Again, I'm not. Please don't anyone think that I'm slamming fans for not going, because I haven't gone in a long time either. I live up here in the Valley. So I'm just wondering, just as an alum, if that relationship is as strong as it used to be.
I'm going to go on next week, next Wednesday. Looking forward to it with Mike Luke on the AZ12 podcast. And I want to talk about this with him. And I think just get his perspective as somebody that is, living in Tucson and I'm up here. Now, you have a family, Shane. I don't. So, I'm a single guy. So for me, it's a lot easier to go to games, which is why I've gone to as many football games as I've been able to go to. I'm sure you would love to, but unfortunately, family things get in the way. And that's for a lot of people. And I know, it's one thing for a big game. You find a way to make it work. But these late starts, I mean, fans, I think like the 7 o'clock mark is like, hey, I can do this. But let's also be honest. I'm not going to any game on a Monday or Tuesday at McHale Center. For where I live in the Phoenix area, I'm not going. I don't care if it was number one against number two on a Monday or Tuesday night. You got to work the next day. Like it's not feasible.
I think just in terms of raw numbers, though, basketball it's a little bit easier just because there's fewer seats. There's like a third of the amount of seats to fill as in a football game. So you'd hope there to be just enough people in Tucson to fill those. So, but
sure,
if you're talking about people from the Valley, because there are a lot of UA fans like us in the Valley, that I agree with you. That's especially on a weeknight. Like a Monday night, you're just getting back to work, and then you got to you maybe get home at whatever from the Iowa State game. If we went to that, it would be like 1:30, 2 a.m. and have to get up for work the next day. That's a challenge for sure.
Yeah, I just don't see that, it's really not all that feasible, to be honest, for anyone that doesn't live in Tucson now. And, if you live 15 minutes from campus, I get it. That's fine. You can do it. But if you have a family and you have to put kids to bed, I'm not going to bash anyone for not showing up on a Monday or Tuesday night. On a Saturday, I believe that McHale Center should be filled every time. If Arizona's a tournament caliber team, McHale Center should be filled every Saturday.
Yeah, and it still was filled for Iowa State, but that Arizona had that flash sale of selling tickets at a really good price for a premium game, and it's just not something I think you would have seen 20 years ago.
Probably not, but I also the game. How many games 20 years ago were being played at these crazy hours?
Sure. Oh yeah, no TV times. It's definitely. I'll just put it nicely, influence the game, and a lot of times not for the better.
All right, let's hit on a couple of quick topics here. Women's basketball, big win over West Virginia last week. Shane, buy or sell that their tournament hopes are pretty alive at this point.
Definitely buy it. Yeah. ESPN's resident women's basketball bracketologist currently has Arizona as one of his first four out. They have some pretty bad losses in non-conference, but they're still right there. As of this recording, they are number 57 in net. They're just 1-4 against quad one teams, but they got their first quad one win with a blowout of West Virginia last weekend at McHale. They have 4 quad one opponents coming up in their next 5 games, so they'll have a number of chances to boost their resume, albeit not quite as many on the men's side. They had a lot of talented sophomores on this team, Williams and Cunningham certainly, but I think kind of the X factor on this team is Skylar Jones. She scored 16 points in each of Arizona's last 2 games, despite just playing 20 minutes in one game and 17 in the other. So she's making the most of her minutes. She's an outstanding 3-point shooter. She's almost 40% from 3 this year, up from 30% last year. So She keeps that up. Arizona's going to pick up some more quad-one wins and probably get into the tournament. The Big 12 isn't quite as stacked on the women's side as it is on the men's, but there's still a lot of good chances for some big wins. And Arizona's getting hot at the right time. I think won three in a row, and I believe that Adia Barnes will help get them back to the tournament.
I certainly hope so. I'll let you know more than I do. I saw the 57 net ranking. I mean, gotta probably win what, 3 out of the next 4 games. It was quite.
Yeah.
I don't know if 2-2 is good enough at this point. But long way to go. So just beat who's on your schedule and watch it play out. It would be great to see him just get in again and
Yeah.
keep the momentum for the program. That's what I want to see. But there's there's some bad losses in there though.
There and I think it's disappointing because I think none of us expected Arizona to be and women's basketball to be a perennial Final Four contender, even after they went to the national championship game. But I think that Adia Barnes did raise the expectation that this is at least a tournament team and maybe a Sweet 16 contender every year. And they've fallen off a bit. And I think we're a little surprised. But I mean, they're still definitely a lot better than they were under the previous regime. So don't get me wrong there. And they have a lot of really talented underclass women. But I think the minimum expectation now is and probably should be an NCAA tournament bid every year. I mean, Adia Barnes' contract, she got 2 contract extensions for that reason. And so I would certainly hope that the minimum they get there, and I think they will. I think they're coming along kind of like the men's team is.
I want to talk one quick football note here. Arizona scheduled Washington State in 2026 and 2027, which is pretty cool considering it's a former Pac-12, opponent that we would see play at Arizona Stadium every 2 or 3 years. So my buy or sell, Shane, is if I'm Arizona going forward when it comes to non-conference scheduling, schedule the West Coast teams. Don't look east. Schedule the West. Schedule the UCLAs, the USCs, the Cals, the Stanfords, Oregon State, I mean, focus on that before you start working on Alabama, Virginia Tech. I know those games are already pre-scheduled, but that's what I want to see. Am I onto something, or do you like scheduling whomever, whenever?
I'll buy that. I like them scheduled. It's not so much the West Coast, but just former Pac-12 opponents. I think would be awesome. I think it'd be great to keep them in the Rolodex, so to speak. That familiarity. That's another thing we didn't really talk about. We've talked about it before, but not on this episode. Is you look at all the teams coming in to Arizona Stadium this past year and this coming year, and you think, well, other than ASU, and maybe Colorado, I don't really know these guys. Why should I care? So I think having that familiarity, Washington State, maybe Oregon. I don't know if Oregon would come, but Oregon State, Stanford, Cal. They're not hardcore rivalries, but they do have a history. They have that familiarity, and I think it would make a lot of sense to keep some of those West Coast games going when they can.
All right, I'm with you. I think it's an absolute must. And as much as other schools across the country, getting a Virginia Tech or somebody like that, I don't care. I want to see the teams, the West Coast teams. I want to see Arizona Stanford again. Yeah. I want to see Arizona Cal. I mean, we're going to think every time Arizona plays Cal from now until eternity, you and I are going to think about the Hail Mary.
Yeah,
and what a wild game that was. I'd love to see Arizona.
And another one. Think about the triple overtime game that Arizona won at Cal, and Colin Schooler made the big play in the end zone to keep Cal from score. So they've got some good history there. So I mean, again, it's not Arizona ASU or USC UCLA or anything like that, but there is that history there. There is that familiarity, and it's definitely be more enticing to tell fans, hey, a former foe that we know very well is coming back to town. So no, I think Washington State, I think home with them is awesome.
Priority scheduling is where I'm going with that one. So prioritize Western teams. All right. Well, as always, Wildcat Country is brought to you by Harrah's Auction Casino. And by the way, if you don't have any plans for the big game on February 9th, you can watch the Super Bowl at Harrah's Auction. Check out, go to Ticketmaster.com. They have tickets for that. You can buy, food package on there. Event entry is complimentary, but Sunday, February 9th at 4 p.m. The game is at 4:30 p.m. at the Event Center at Harrah's Auction Casino. Check that out. They are having a great party and should be a great time. Coming up next, Shane and I had a chance to sit down with Evan Miyakawa, making his debut appearance on Wildcat Country. Let's hear what he has to say. Shane, it's time for another first-time guest on the program, Evan Miyakawa. He is a data scientist. He is a college basketball analytics genius. That's what you are. I mean, I'm speaking the truth here. And of all times to have you on the show, Evan, well, first of all, welcome to Wildcat Country. And second, of all times to have you on the show, so after watching Arizona win whatever that was on Monday night, how do the Wildcats stack up in your metrics now and then going forward?
I mean, first of all, we got to talk about I had the biggest yell in my apartment that I've had in a long time when that shot from Caleb Love went in. What an absolute turnaround, and not just to win that game, but for a resume perspective, to get a win over a top 3 team in Iowa State, and not just barely, but they won by double digits in the end. So I have Arizona right now 14th in the country. That's predicting how good they're going to be going forward. 13th best offense, 20th best defense, so top 20 in both. I think that's really great. From a resume perspective right now, I think they're around a 6 seed based on kind of consensus rankings. In terms of how good this team is right now, both in terms of the win last night and just kind of what they've done over the last month or so, I think they're more like kind of top 4 or 5 seed in terms of team strength. So if they continue playing as well as they have, the way that they've played in the Big 12 so far has been incredible. I think they could move up a seed line or 2 if they keep this up.
Yeah, Evan, you've done a heck of a job creating a following, and I know you've got a lot of subscribers and a lot of followers, and you send me a lot of Arizona-related content that is very digestible and very interesting. There's a lot of analytics sites out there. Obviously, people reference KenPom all the time. What sets yours apart, not just in terms of your team rankings, but you also have player rankings as well?
Yeah, so a lot of what I do is not just team focused, but it really goes down to the player and lineup level. So a lot of what I'm doing is I have a metric called Bayesian performance rating that basically measures how valuable every player is to their team on offense and defense on a per possession basis. And that takes into account your individual stats. It takes into account your impact on team performance, just in terms of how the team is doing when you're on the floor, adjusting for all the other players on the court and how good they are. It also looks at your sort of history coming into the season, whether you're a high-level high school recruit or how you performed in previous seasons. And it predicts how good you're going to go going forward. You can build on top of that lineup stuff where I'm evaluating how good every lineup is in the country and predicting how good those are going to be going forward, or even looking at combinations of 2-man lineups or 3-man groups. And then all of that kind of builds up to the team level as well, where now you say, okay, you have your roster, you have how good the coach is, you have all these lineups, and that kind of all feeds into your overall team sort of rating that predicts how good you're going to be going forward. So it's really kind of a player, lineup, team sort of focus from bottom to top there.
Yeah, and I was looking at your site, and Arizona has a lot of players in your, not the top 50, but in the 70 to 85 or so range. But if I remember right, and I don't have this in front of me, Arizona has one of the best 3-player combinations in the country. Is that accurate? And if so, can you tell us about that?
Yeah. Let me pull that up really quick because it's probably changed since I last looked at it. But just in terms of overall depth on this team, like you mentioned, they don't have anyone in the top 50 nationally right now, but they have 4 guys inside the top 85. You got Caleb Love, Carter Bryant, Henry Visar, and KJ Lewis. So maybe 2 of those guys are predictable, Love and Lewis. And then 2 of those guys are maybe a bit of a surprise in Bryant and Visar. But what I'm doing is not just saying how good you've been on the course of the season as a whole, but it's actually per possession. So what it's basically telling you is per possession, or when you have those guys on the court, Bryant and Visar are giving a lot to this team in terms of their individual statistical contribution, in terms of how well they're impacting team performance. Jaden Bradley's right outside of that. And then you've got Krivas kind of in the 6th spot there. But I think if he had stayed healthy this season, obviously that's a huge bummer. We know the potential that he has, and so he could have been a big piece for them too. But really, those are your top 5 in Love, Bryant, Visar, Lewis, and Bradley. If I pull up the 3-man lineup stuff really quickly here, I recently put together a graphic of the best 3-man groups in the country. Yeah. And one of the top performing ones, surprisingly, was this trio of Jaden Bradley, Henry Visar, and Anthony Delorso. And I think something that's been interesting about that is that it's only played 187 possessions. So that's not as much as you're going to see from other ones. But when you look at what Arizona has done to change the course of their season, Obviously, losing Krivas really changed the formula of what Tommy Lloyd had to work with. But he has gotten more out of Del Orso recently, and Vesar is stepping into a bigger role. And so maybe Bradley has kind of provided the sort of the key to unlocking those two when those three are together. Again, it's not the biggest sample size ever, but it's enough to say, hey, those three together are working pretty well. And so that's something that we want to see going forward.
You conducted a study pretty recently that I thought was interesting. You wanted to find out which schools get the most production out of their transfers. You wanted to measure which schools develop them and get them to outperform expectations. And your top two were Arizona and UConn. Does that suggest that Tommy Lloyd and his staff excel at further developing players compared to where they came from?
Yeah, I mean, Arizona ranked number one in basically saying how good was a player coming in, and then how much production did they actually have after their first season. So what that really points to is that this coaching staff, number one, is good at identifying players that maybe are overlooked by other schools, but are really going to fit Arizona's system. And two, during their year at Arizona, they get them to play exactly the way that they need in order to extract the most value out of them. And again, this was a study that was looked at last offseason, so I don't have those numbers for this year, but Jaden Bradley is a great example of that. I still thought he was a good get for them when they got him at the time, but the role that he's been able to take in the 2 years since has been remarkable. I think he was one of their most impactful players last season, despite the fact that he came off the bench. This season's been up and down in some ways, but all things considered, when you look at the strengths of this team, their backcourt with Love and Bradley and KJ Lewis, every one of them brings something different. And I think, he's one of those guys who's going to put in everything on offense and everything on defense. And this team really does revolve around him in a lot of ways. And so, he's just an example of that, but there's been plenty other examples over the last several years of Arizona really getting a lot more value out of each individual player than maybe they would have had if they'd gone somewhere else.
Yeah, all right. So I want to talk to you about this is a great feature on your site, a free feature for those, and we'll talk more about how people can subscribe later. But go to evanmia.com under Team Breakdown. You click on Overview. You scroll to Arizona. What I noticed is that of all the 10 players that are shown on Arizona's roster that play, including Conrad Martinez, the least effective, according to your rankings, is Trey Townsend by a long shot. Can you explain how those rankings, how you come up with those, and what those mean for dumb people like me?
Right. So yeah, Trey Townsend's an interesting one. When he came into Arizona, my transfer projections for him were nowhere near as high as a lot of the buzz he was getting. And I think a lot of that was just due to the fact that he was a very high profile mid-major player in the tournament last year and the leading scorer for Oakland and all of that. I think there are a couple things that are kind of holding him back here. The first is when you look at just how well the team has performed when he's on the floor. He's towards the bottom, if not at the bottom, last I checked, in the rotation, just in terms of how good the team has played with him on the floor, kind of adjusted for the strength of opponent's face. So from that perspective alone, he's not had the impact you want. Then you look at his individual stats, and the thing is, he, probably his best attribute is, at least coming into the year, was scoring, but he's not a particularly efficient scorer. When you look at where he ranks in terms of his projected three-point shooting percentage at my website, it's just 32.6%. That's bottom half in the country. He's just a B- grade in two-point shooting, so just a little bit above average. He's a fine but not great free throw shooter, and then he doesn't really bring a ton else to the table in terms of like massively above average in terms of rebounding or playmaking. So all those things together, he's a fine player, and I think he's in terms of the profile that Arizona was going, I think he fits a need that they have. But the individual stats haven't been as prolific from an efficiency perspective. And then his impact on team performance while he's on the court also hasn't been as good. So when you look at some of the guys ahead of him, like even Tobe Awaka and Anthony Delorso, they're predicted going forward to have more of an impact on a per possession basis than Trey Townsend.
Yeah. So interesting that you brought that up because Awaka. So ESPN on Monday night was touting, he's one of the best offensive rebounders in the country. But when you look at your rankings from an offensive perspective, Awaka, not as much.
So actually, in terms of the offensive rebounding component, overall, Awaka ranks towards the bottom of this roster. But I do think one of his biggest strength and potentially why he isn't lower is because of his defense or his rebounding. When you look at kind of his player profile on my site, not only is his rebounding grade really high, but they mentioned this. He's leading the country in offensive rebounding rate. He also has the highest predicted offensive rebounding percentage going forward in the country per my website. So that's, hard to beat there. So I think that really is what he brings, is the rebounding side of things. We saw an extra side of him last night where he also scored. He doesn't do that very often. He doesn't often score more than, 6 or 8 points in a game. So maybe that's a little bit of an outlier, and certainly last night's a recipe for success going forward. But I think the other part of that for him that's similar to Townsend is that overall the team has been a little bit underwhelming when he's been on the court this year, just in terms of the advanced metrics. So again, I think that's something that you want to see improve. But last night, or his impact on Monday was huge for sure.
Yeah, well, and to your point about transfers, if Tommy Lloyd gets some more time with him, he could end up being even more impactful in the years to come. One of my favorite metrics of yours, Evan, not just because it sounds really cool, but because it's interesting, is what you call kill shots. And I believe, you correct me if I'm wrong, but those are basically double-digit runs, like 10-0 or more. Arizona had 2 of those, 2 kill shots against Iowa State, and they needed both of them to win. Can you explain a little bit more about the kill shot metric and basically why it's important and where Arizona ranks there, both in terms of their kill shots and kill shots against them?
Yeah, so a kill shot is a term I coined a couple years ago that basically just measures anytime a team scores 10 or more unanswered points in a game. It doesn't catch every single time that a team goes on a scoring run, but I think it's a great, easy way of tracking it, because a lot of times 10 points unanswered, you'll see it on the TV graphic, 10-0 run, something like that, and so it's a really good way of measuring what teams have the ability to quickly go on a scoring run and flip the script in a game. And similarly, also, what teams are good at not allowing that to happen to them, where if they have a lead and then they give up a 10-0 run, all of a sudden it's kind of out of their hands. So when you look at Arizona, they have 19 kill shots on the total of the season, including those 2 on Monday. That's almost 1 per game. That's top 4 or 5 in the Big 12. But the thing that really sticks out to me is that they've only allowed 3 10-0 runs all season. That's second best in the conference. And I really, really like that. I think when you're looking at, is this metric, this kill shot metric, predictive of tournament success? Often what I found is that the teams that are the best at conceding very few kill shots is often the most important thing, because of what that means is they're not likely to give up a lead very easily. They're not likely to let a game get out of hand. And so it means they always have a chance of certainly, taking a lead back, but they're not going to be precarious, and I certainly think that's something we saw even last night where, there were points where an Iowa State could have threatened to pull away, but Arizona stayed with them. And then when the right time came, they really put those runs together to either get back in the lead or fully put the game away, as we saw in overtime.
You don't see many of those kill shots in overtime, but Arizona had one, and it was an amazing way to, amazing way to end the game. My last question for you, Evan, we really appreciate your time. Like Eric said, put the standings aside for a second and just look at the Big 12 pecking order. I know people can look at your rankings, but just your best prediction of, who maybe the top 3 or 4 best teams are in the Big 12 and where Arizona might fit in there.
I think there is comfortably a top 4, and I think you can make an argument that Arizona is kind of moving into that group as well. Just in terms of how good these teams are and how good I think they're going to be going forward. Houston, I have the best team in the country after their win against Kansas. I actually think they're still underrated by a lot of people. Iowa State, I have 4th. Kansas 8th. Texas Tech has really turned a corner. I think they're kind of seeing a lot of the potential that they were touted for in the offseason. They're 9th, and then Arizona's up to 14th. Then there's a bit of a gap, and then you have this kind of second tier of teams that are hoping to make the tournament, but maybe are not quite as strong. Baylor, BYU, Cincinnati, West Virginia, and then you kind of have the rest after that. So I really do think there's kind of 3 tiers in this conference, and I think it's safe to say right now Arizona's edging into being in that top tier as opposed to in that second tier, which I think is really encouraging considering where they were, basically a month ago.
All right, Evan, I don't mean to be the bearer of bad news for Wildcats fans, but of the 2 games that Arizona has coming up in this next week, at Arizona State and at BYU, which is the most scary of the 2, in your opinion, that the Wildcats are facing?
So the BYU one is interesting because it's going to be on the road. I have Arizona favored by a point in that game. But BYU has been a little bit better recently than they showed at the beginning of Big 12 play. And so I think that's just kind of one of those classic, like, every night's a rock fight kind of things where you have this exhilarating win at home against a top 3 team, and then you have to turn around and go to Provo, and this BYU team is really talented. So I think if I'm picking Arizona to win that game, but it's pretty much a toss up. And then you mentioned, they have an upcoming game against Texas Tech.
No, Arizona State. Arizona
Tech,
State.
Oh, sorry, I missed that.
But yeah, they got ASU.
Oh, you're right.
Saturday.
Yes. Yeah. So, the Arizona State one, I think, is much less of a challenge. I have Arizona State barely inside the top 100. That, again, and it's on the road, but not quite as far of a trip. So I think Arizona should win that game. If they don't, we're going to have problems. But the BYU one, I think, is a real test.
I love the way you phrase it. If they don't, we're gonna have problems. Yeah, we're gonna have problems.
Arizona fans feel the same way. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. My last question for you, and we really appreciate having you on. As Shane said, how do people go? What can you tell more about your website? How do people sign up, and what do they get when they sign up?
Yeah, so the website at evanmia.com, it really has a lot of things. We kind of mentioned some of it. It's mainly focused on team and player performance, as well as lineup analysis, transfer portal projections, which are going to be huge just around the corner. But it's really become very popular with a lot of coaches, including the Arizona staff, for roster building and game scouting, things of that nature. And so it's been really cool to see the growth over the years. A ton of programs are using it, but it's also very accessible to people in the media and fans just for analyzing the sport. So if you're into that kind of thing, evanmia.com is the place to find it.
Didn't you get a shout out from a coach recently during a press conference?
Yeah, Bruce Pearl talked about me this morning.
It's kind of a big deal. Number 1 team in the country. Yeah,
that is a big deal. Congratulations on all your success. Thanks for hanging out with Shane and me, and we'd love to have you back on down the road.
Thanks, Eric and Shane. This has been great. Always love talking about Arizona. Let's do it.
Discover more Play for All at Harrah's Auction Casino.
Hi, folks. Here are your drinks.
Where having fun means racking up reward credits with the Caesars Rewards loyalty program that can be redeemed for food, free play, hotel stays, and more. Not only here in the city of Maricopa, but also at more than 50 Caesars properties coast to coast. From Harrah's Las Vegas to Caesars Palace in Atlantic City. What are you waiting for? Play for All at Harrah's Auction Casino, the official sponsor of Play.
Yeah, great stuff with Evan in the last segment, Shane. I mean, that was definitely a unique perspective, and I feel like I got smarter. Just listen. I mean, he's just so analytical. But that's good things about Arizona, which makes me feel pretty good, especially about that ASU game coming up this weekend.
Yeah, well, and Evan he's someone who I think has really worked from the ground up. I mean, he is. Yeah, I forget who said it. I think it was Pat Riley said you can, and I think this applies to anything. Like said to coach, like anything. With coaching, for example, you have to be kind of obsessed with it to be great at it. And I think Evan's kind of obsessed with analytics that way. And he's dove into it, and he's perfected his model. And like I said, Bruce Pearl at Auburn just gave him a shout out. And so a lot of teams seem like they're using his stuff along. There's a lot of competition out there with analytics, but he's definitely up there. He does his homework, and definitely check him out. We'd like to have him on again soon.
All right, let's make some picks this week. Last week you got 2, I got 1. That Arizona barely covered the spread against Colorado. I think the line was 13.5 or 14. They won by 14. I'm giving you the point there. Or they won by 15. And I had it at 13, so I just missed the line there. So you get a point there.
Very, very charitable of you. Thank you.
And you get the upset with Xavier over UConn. So that's where I got it. I got one with Baylor at Utah's the Big 12 unranked road win. What is your Big 12 unranked road win this week?
There's a few attractive picks in there. Actually, 3 of them that I saw, but I'm going to go. I kept changing my mind on this, and I ended up with Colorado at TCU. Okay. I think Buffs are due. Colorado's due to win one. TCU's lost back-to-back games, including by 27 at UCF. I'm going to take Colorado to finally get its first Big 12 win. They got to get one at some point.
I am going to say BYU at UCF. It's the game before Arizona. Before they play Arizona, we hope they win because you don't want them to lose. It's generally not a good thing when a team loses before playing Arizona. I think we know that. So go ahead. Good luck to BYU there. How about your ranked non-Big 12 upset? So an unranked team beating a ranked team. Who you got?
Yeah, I don't know if I call it an upset, but in terms of an unranked team beating a ranked team, I'm going to take Oklahoma over number 24 Vanderbilt. Oklahoma's probably going to be favored in that game. So, but the Sooners they've gotten back on track a bit after losing a couple of games to unranked opponents. Vanderbilt's just 2-2 in road games. Oklahoma's 9-2 at home, and we got to root for Oklahoma, right? Because they beat the Wildcats, and it is as long. But we got to root for that quality loss. So, give me the Sooners to beat Vandy.
All right, I'm gonna go off the grid with this one, Shane. I'm going, and I liked your pick, by the way, the best. But I'm gonna go with Baylor over number 11 Kansas. After watching what happened to Kansas last week and losing a game that they had a 99.7% chance to win, up 6 with 13 seconds left, I am out on Kansas. And Baylor, it's a must-win game
about
for
it.
them.
Yeah, well, in Kansas, well, they destroyed UCF by 50 at UCF a couple weeks ago, and then on Tuesday they just squeaked by UCF at home. So Kansas might be in its own head right now.
I am out on Kansas, so I am going to go with Baylor for the upset. All right, let's talk about the game on Saturday. I mean, I'm going to be there. It's a big one. I hope the Wildcats. Listen, it's my birthday. The Wildcats. I hope do not let me down. I get to watch a game in Tempe, and not where I really wanted to be on February 1st, but it is what it is. All right, Shane, what is your pick? Arizona at ASU. Can the Wildcats keep up the momentum?
Hopefully they take 1 out of 2 in the Valley this year. A big thing to watch going into that game from the ASU side is the health of Jaden Quintons. He's dealing with a sprained ankle that he played through against Iowa State, but he had to sit out the Colorado game. So sprained ankle, you think there's a decent chance he'd miss at least one more game, which would mean ASU would be without one of its star freshmen and their best rebounder. Even without him, ASU edged out Colorado on the road on Tuesday, and Devils have been playing pretty well. They won at West Virginia. They played Iowa State tough for 35 minutes before they fell apart. EvanMaya.com has ASU ranked number 43 nationally on defense, but just 124 on offense. So if Arizona goes on one of its kill shot runs that Evan talks about, it's going to be tough for ASU to keep up. I still think Arizona is going to have a little bit of a hangover from the euphoria of the Iowa State game. Maybe they fall behind early, like, classic, they fall behind like 12-4 or something like that, and we all start to panic. I think it's going to be close for a while. I think Arizona finds a way to win by somewhere in the 8 to 10 point range. So I'll split the difference and say Arizona by 9 over the Sun Devils.
All right. I am going Arizona by 8. So it's funny that you take that. I just think the Wildcats find a way to pull away at the end. I think similar game to what we saw last year. It was the Wildcats got a big lead. They then let up in the second half, and then they finished the game strong. I think you're going to see the same thing in Tempe on Saturday. Now, Tuesday night, Evan talked about it. Arizona at BYU. Are you as optimistic that the Wildcats can make it, what is that, a 10-1 start in conference if we're correct about the ASU game?
Yeah, that one's going to be tough. BYU is definitely playing its best basketball of the season. They've won 3 in a row. They're 11-1 at home. They're in the top 20 nationally in offense, according to both EvanMaya.com and KenPom. Very similar to where Arizona is ranked in that category. BYU plays a slower tempo, so whoever controls the pace of the game is likely to win. BYU's leading scorer, Richie Saunders, he's averaging 19.5 points, shooting 50% from three-point range in his last 6 games, so he's on a heater. On paper, it's a game Arizona should win, but like Evan said, by a small margin. I think when they meet at McHale, they will. BYU's on a roll right now. They're playing at home. It's going to be a big game atmosphere. Not a reflection so much on Arizona, but more on BYU playing well and being at home. I'm going to take the Cougars to win a close game. So let's say BYU by 3.
All right. I don't have much more to add than what you gave. I don't like the spot for Arizona on Tuesday night in BYU, a tough place to play. I'm not saying that it can't be done. I mean, Baylor took BYU to overtime this week and fell short. I split the road trip. I think BYU wins this game by 7 or 8 points. So I'm going to roll with that. I just win 1 out of 2 on the road. And I know some fans aren't going to want to see that, but I'm also going to phrase it this way. I have been wrong about Arizona all year. I have just been off. I cannot get my finger on the pulse of this team. So I hope I'm wrong. But I don't know. I mean, this is as Evan said and you said, Shane, it's kind of a toss-up. Win 1 out of 2, and we start next week, and I go, you know what? They're in good shape. They're 9-2 in conference with 9 games to play. I feel really good about things. That's what I want to say on next week's episode.
And I think that's fair. I think that's fair. I mean, there's no shame in losing a hard-fought game on the road. And I think we felt that way about the Texas Tech game until the last 5 minutes. But there's really two. There's a race and then kind of a sub race in the Big 12. Obviously, the race for the Big 12 championship. Houston's 10-0, Arizona's 9-1, right behind them. And then you have a race for the top to finish in the top 4, which will earn you a double bye in the Big 12 tournament. And that was really shaping up to be a 5-team race between Houston, Arizona, Iowa State, Kansas, and Texas Tech. I think those are clearly the 5 best teams in the conference at the moment. So Arizona's in good shape. They already got an early edge. So if you could find a way to hold on to that and finish in the top 4. I know we want to win the Big 12. It would be awesome to see, but if nothing else, they finish in the top 4 in a very good conference. They would just need 3 games to win the Big 12 tournament, and it's also one fewer game where you have to worry about a possible injury going to the NCAA tournament. So definitely worth keeping an eye on that race.
Should be an interesting weekend and very much looking forward to it. So want to thank Evan Miyakawa for joining us. Great to catch up with him. For Shane Dale, I'm Eric Cohen. Thanks for listening. And as always, bear down.